Some books cannot be fully appreciated the first time through. You miss the deeper meanings, the foreshadowing, the nuance of all the author had on that page. Here's my top 10 examples. I've read a ton of fantasy and science fiction, and I'm reading more all the time. I've got a TBR list of over 1,400 books. And still, with all that out there waiting for me, on occasion, I take time to reread something. Why? Because some books simply demand it. These are great books that go next level when you give them another try. Why does this happen? An author knows the full story. The problem is it's in the author's head, not yours. You're simply not going to be able to fully pick up what the author is laying down, despite the incredible skill the author may have as an author. The first time you go through a book or a series, there's just so much you can't connect yet because you don't know where it's going. And it's impossible for it to be otherwise. Now, sometimes that's okay. What you got that first read through, it was enough. But sometimes a book or a series is at a level that you want, you need, you crave more. That's when the reread becomes necessary, a thing of beauty. And rereading, it opens your mind. You get so much more beauty, depth, nuance, complexity than you realized was sitting there right in front of you the first time through. The very best books, they keep delivering on multiple rereads. I know, crazy. Here's my list of top 10 books and series I believe offer the most amazing experiences through the reread. I speak for all the ones on my list through experience. But first, 3 honorable mentions. Number 1, The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have reread this trilogy countless times. You could almost throw in The Hobbit as a prequel. And I've read the whole set again and again and again. I have come to appreciate all that Tolkien did in there at a level that I didn't even come close to appreciating the first time through. There's just so much he's packed into what is not actually all that long a series. His world building, the entire picture that he had in his mind that he manages to portray in this struggle between good and evil in these 3 relatively quick books and prequel is amazing. Now, years later, I did read the Silmarillion, which helps you understand a little bit of what was going on in Tolkien's head, that backstory that he was basing all this on. But it's all right there in the books. And okay, read the Silmarillion and then go do a reread of The Lord of the Rings. Oh, it's amazing. Honorary mention number 2 would be Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun. Now, I read this. It's a quartet. I didn't really enjoy it. I appreciated it. It is a literary masterpiece. What he has written is incredible, but I didn't have a lot of fun going through it. It was work. But it's on this list because of all the rabid fans of the Book of the New Sun who honestly will tell you point blank, you have not read the Book of the New Sun until you start the reread. I've heard this so many times, and knowing, having gone through it and understanding the complexity that's there, I believe them. And if I reread it, I would probably have such a vastly greater appreciation of what Gene Wolfe has done. My problem is I didn't enjoy it enough the first time to ever want to do a reread. But, your feel on books is subjective. You might read it and go, that was great, and immediately dive into the reread. So it's worthy of being on the list. If it hooks you, you'll be hooked hard and you'll enjoy multiple reads. Honorable mention number 3, I have no doubt will be a fantastic reread. It's only honorable because I haven't finished the series yet, though I am close. And that's Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen. There are 10 books in this massive epic fantasy series. I'm a third of the way through book 10. I'm confident this far in that, yes, everyone who touts how important it is to do a book reread, how much more you get the second time through, the third time through, 100% right. There's been so much to this, and it's fantastic the first time. Those are the best books for me to do a reread because I loved it the first time, and it will go the second time and the third time. But since I haven't finished, I couldn't rightly put it on the list. But I had to talk about it. Okay, let's get to the actual list then. Number 10, Red Shirts by John Scalzi. This is a standalone novel. It's comic science fiction. It's highly entertaining. I have read it twice. The first time was good. The second time, I'm like, oh man, Scalzi, what you've done there. His wit, you come to appreciate it at a whole nother level. It's not the deepest of books. There's a reason it's only 10 on this list, but it's definitely worth a reread. I got a lot more out of it the second time around. Number 9, World War Z by Max Brooks. Zombie apocalypse. Y'all know I love zombie apocalypse unless you're first time here, and go look. I've got a whole playlist on these kinds of books, but World War Z is premier zombie apocalyptic literature. I've read it twice. The first time, it was great. The second time, I'm like, oh, the appreciation of what he had built through this book, mm, just fantastic. I look forward to rereading it again. It's that good. Number 8, The Dragon Riders of Pern by Anne McCaffrey. Now, this is a massive science fiction series. There's like 26 books you can read right now. I've only read the first 14, but that's through the core of the series, which ends at book 11, maybe 12. And then you get more from this world because there's so much to enjoy and so much richness in Pern. But those first core books, I've read them twice. Some of them I've read 3 times. And I loved them thoroughly the first time as you get to discover the world of Pern and the Dragon Riders and their fight against the Red. But Anne McCaffrey has put layers in this that you just can't appreciate the first time. Now, I wouldn't say it's super, super deep on those sorts of things. It's just you really like it the first time. You really love it the second time, and you start to enjoy it next level on further repeats. It's comfort reading for me now. And I love me some Pern. Number 7, The Dark Tower by Stephen King. This is a 7-book epic fantasy series, and I've read it twice. The Dark Tower is not your standard fantasy series. It's got a little bit of science fiction blended in, a teeny bit of horror, but mostly it's just fantasy. King wrote this over decades, and he's tied it in, or perhaps I should say he's tied his other works into it in many multi-layered ways. So the first time I read the Dark Tower series, I hadn't read as much of King as I had on the second time. And it makes a difference. You see all those connections, all this world, the Kingverse that's out there, that's very layered and complex. And it gives a richness to the Dark Tower. But just, forget about the rest. Just reading the Dark Tower a second time through, you get to better appreciate what was going on in the things that he wrote in those earlier books. So I really appreciate the Dark Tower. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but there's a richness to it, a creativeness that Stephen King has brought to his writing, and it's very different from anything else King has written. Although there's one other thing on this list that's close and connected to the Dark Tower, but we'll get back to that. Number 6 is The Dune Saga by Frank Herbert, and continued by his son Brian and author Kevin J. Anderson. Now, that's almost sacrilege that I added those in there, but it's how I feel. The Dune series is first 6 books written by Frank Herbert, and then he passed away. There was supposed to be one more book. His son Brian later on collaborates with Kevin J. Anderson to write 2 different prequel trilogies, and then 2 more books to finish the series, and then they've gone on written more and more. I think they're still writing Dune books. Some of this now is, I'm sure a cash grab. People want the books, we'll write more books, but they're not necessary books. But the initial 14 books, so Frank 6, the 2 prequel trilogies, and the final 2 books to finish, mwah, I love them all. There's a different style when you move past Frank, because Frank was this level of author, and Brian and Kevin are down here. They're still okay. They're not trash. I enjoy them, but they're not as deep. So when it comes to a reread, you do appreciate more of what's going on, but I think the reread quality is deeper in Frank's 6 books. Perhaps most of all in book 1, just Dune. But there's a lot he has foreshadowed. There's reason things are going on that you don't fully understand till later. The prequels kind of start to spoon feed you some things that you should know about that are all hinted at in the earlier books. All is maybe strong. But still, Dune is a great one. The first time through, you will not fully comprehend what you just read. Go back through it again, and you'll be like, oh, this is good. Number 5, Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series. And here I'm talking about what's out as of August 2024. Era 1, 3 books, and Era 2, 4 books. I've read them all twice. Mistborn, the first time through, that original trilogy, yeah, it was good. The second time through, it was great. Mistborn Era 2, the first time through, well, it was okay. The second time through, it was fantastic. These books demand to be reread. There's too much in Brandon's mind, and sometimes he just fails to communicate it well enough. I mean, I don't know how he could do it different, honestly. He just leaves you stumbling at times. You just can't figure out what's going on. And maybe in your recollections when you're done, you're like, oh, I see. But if you take the time to reread them, wow. It's just so fantastic. And Mistborn is not just great fantasy, it's also very entertaining. There are a lot of elements of humor, especially in Era 2, that I just love. Number 4, The Stand by Stephen King. His single longest book and my single favorite book that he has written. The Stand is really 2 books. The book of a massive worldwide pandemic that wipes out most of the human population. And the second half, the survivors coming together in 2 different places. A group that's banding around all that is good, and a group that's banding around all that is evil. In Las Vegas. I don't know what King was saying there. Sin City. Anyways, then you have this great battle between good and evil. It's not truly a battle like one might think, but it is definitely a struggle. And I've read this one multiple times. Not 2, not 3, multiple times. And every time I've been through it, I've gained more. It's been a few years now. I'm starting to get the itch. I may need to read Stand again soon. Number 3, The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I'm talking about 17 books and short stories and novellas. I have read all of the books twice now, some of them 3 times. The novellas and short stories I've only read once. But the first time through all of these books was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed the experience reading this great urban fantasy series about Harry Dresden, a professional wizard who's also a private investigator, as he tries to defend and protect on his turf of Chicago, which is where I was born and spent my first 12 years. That gives a little extra nuance to the story for me. But there's a much bigger picture of what's going on that he gets involved in and sucked into, and for reasons that you come to understand, it's pretty important that he is. But when you go back and reread, you're like, oh, I mean, the stuff that Butcher is laying down in the early books that comes back and he uses so wittily and wisely and smartly, and I just keep making up adjectives here. I mean, those weren't made up, but I'm piling on. I'm so appreciative of how he's able to put all these little pieces in early that were perfect in the stories they appear in, but they're relevant later. They have massive tie-ins by the time you're getting to books 14, 15, 16, and 17. And the series is not done. So I expect more of this to come. I'm sure book 18 is going to have some payoffs for things that were laid out in these earlier books still. And he's projected to write 24, 25 books in this series. So bring it, Butcher. Ready for more. Number 2, The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and completed, based on Robert Jordan's notes, by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of my favorite series of all time. Right now, it is my favorite series of all time because I haven't finished Malazan Book of the Fallen. That might topple it, but I got to see how this thing ends. The Wheel of Time, I have reread many times, many times. And every time I go through it, I get new things. That is the sign of an excellent story for a reread, that there's more to discover. There's more gems hidden, things just waiting for you to unpack. I cannot comprehend how all of this was in Robert Jordan's head. And the thing is, there are stores of his notes on every character that he named. He had a backstory. I mean, he put so much time into world building and character development that what you're finding is so real, so vivid, so rich, so entertaining, and so much to find on a reread. This is why my son Zach and I dedicate a section of this podcast, this YouTube channel, just to a deep dive working through The Wheel of Time. If you've been following those threads, you know we're on book 7 now, so we're nearing the halfway point. And just working through these with my son, I've still learned more. Fantastic series. Number 2, though, I've got a new number 1. And what would that number 1 be? Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive. I am currently on my reread for this. I had thoughts about the Stormlight Archive the first time I read them. They're a little tough to get through, the first couple of books in particular. But if you power through, there's some payoffs. On the reread, I'm like, holy crap, I missed so much. The Way of Kings, I enjoyed from page 1 now. Seeing what's there. Again, Brandon Sanderson, too much in his head. He can't communicate at all for reasons, but it needs to be reread. It's a totally different book the second time through. And now, as I'm reading Words of Radiance, book 2 right now, I'm almost 2/3 of the way through on the reread. I'm like, it's happened again. This book is so brilliant, so entertaining, so beautiful in the layers, the connections, the things he's laid out. And of course, I'm seeing foreshadowing for things to come in book 3 and 4 that I've already read now as I reread. Book 5, Wind and Truth, comes out in December of this year. That's why I'm rereading now, but I should have reread earlier. Nothing has blown my mind on the reread in the expansion of quality, complexity, and love for what I'm seeing than the Stormlight Archive. A strong number 1. So there you go. That's my list. If you haven't touched some of these yet, it's time for your first read. Get out there and do it, and then be prepared. You're going to want to do the reread. And I'd love to hear from you. What are your favorite science fiction and fantasy books that you've already done a first read and a reread, and you can vouch they are tremendously better the second time around, or the third, or the fourth, as it continues. Be sure to subscribe to catch all the book thoughts and recommendations that Zach and I put out here on this channel. Particularly relevant to this episode, I would point you to a recent one I did, The Way of Kings, How I Was Wrong. Check it out. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.